From the Psych Hub Podcast Network, welcome to Coming Back Better, a podcast sponsored by HCA Healthcare and in collaboration with Columbia University Department of Psychiatry.
Today's episode includes a discussion about miscarriage. We recognize that this topic may be part of your lived experience and respect your choice of taking breaks or maybe choosing not to listen until a time of your choosing. Thank you. Welcome back to another episode of Coming Back Better. Hey, Marjorie.
It's great to be with you again, Paul. So today we're going to talk about a topic that everyone can relate to, right? Which is really about how relationships were affected by COVID. Everybody has a story about this, right? Everybody had to redefine the way that they have their relationships. And I think about pre-COVID, Psych-Up had an office and we would go into the office every day and you'd see people and you had a relationship with people that you worked with. You had friends that you would go out and meet for dinner or happy hour or drinks, and you'd have your family that you'd get together for birthday parties and relationships. I personally was in a long distance relationship. Everything got more challenging when COVID happened. Every single solitary piece of it.
Navigating friendships at any age is a challenge, but trying to stay connected during midlife and in a pandemic might leave some reevaluating their own friendships.
While some are predicting a baby boom 9 months from now, as so many couples spend time together at home, some grim statistics about quarantine quarrels and how they could impact young relationships.
Experts say things are shifting for the swipe right generation, the pandemic transforming the dating landscape.
Yeah, when I was thinking about this topic, I have my buddy Rick, and he's my rock climbing buddy. And during the summer, actually we were able to be COVID safe and out on the rocks and things are good. But in the winter, we'd usually go to the gym, which of course shut down. He was so dear. He bought some outdoor heaters and we hung out in his backyard for the winter and just bundled up. And we got creative and made it work.
I mean, that's what it is, right? It's the creativity that we got and that resiliency that we got. Sounds like we're going to start with our first lived experience.
Yeah, we're going to hear from Whitney talking about how COVID and the pandemic really brought some shift in her understanding of friendships. Let's take a listen and see what she has to say.
I'm excited to listen to Whitney.
Something that we don't really talk about when it comes to the years 2020 through 2022 is really what pandemic revealed is all the friendships that mattered the most and the people who would show up and still become a vital part of our life, because we all have those friendships that are one-sided, where you're the one initiating, you're the one reaching out and connecting and trying to hold the conversation, and they always just disappear. But what happened in 2020, I feel like, is instead of having 25 friends who you talk to all the time in your head, you had 5 show up, and it was the 5 that were checking in on you, making sure you were good, asking what was going on and how you were dealing with it. And suddenly, instead of having 25 friendships that didn't really matter, you were handed 5 friendships that meant the world to you. And I think that's what we forget to focus on when it comes to pandemic. And what did happen is your circles probably got smaller, but your friendships definitely got deeper. It's easy to be someone typing behind a keyboard or a phone, going at conversations that are way too big to convey in a small format like text message. And I'm a big proponent of I will FaceTime you or call you before I ever want to get into a heavy discussion over text message. It just allows too much room for miscommunication, and that's what you have to be aware of when you do go into situations like the pandemic where we're sitting in 2 different locations and we're having a conversation, because it's so easy to misconstrue stuff. One of the biggest fights I've ever had with my best friend from college was during 2020. We kept talking, but we weren't really getting into the meat of it. We just kept talking around the surface in vague ways. And instead of just being direct and open with each other about our frustrations and what was going on and our feelings, we allowed technology to hinder us because we weren't in the same room together. Most of my friendship with her is a long distance thing, but that's where you have to be careful with technology because it is so great and it is so wonderful. But there's a moment where I'll be texting people and be like, this isn't going well. This isn't going well. I gotta stop. And instead of continuing the text message, I will pick up the phone and I will just call them and be like, all right, where are we going wrong? This is what I'm saying. This is why I'm saying it. And this is what I mean by it. What are you taking? And it's where you have to over communicate. The more information I give you in a discussion, oftentimes the better off we are in that discussion. I think the only thing left to be said is don't underestimate who's your friend and who's really going to show up for you.
Listening to Whitney, I really appreciate how she brought intention into relationships and sort of made a shift from autopilot into, no, what's really important to me? What do I value?
We really had an opportunity, I think, to look at our friends much more from quality than quantity.
Yeah.
And you had to be so intentional. I mean, I just remember I would always schedule these Zoom happy hours, right? Or FaceTime happy hours, virtual happy hours, where you're just really just sitting with friends and just catching up. And it kind of meant the world, right? And I feel like because it was so intentional, I really do feel like I got closer with my friends and some people that I kind of maybe were more of acquaintances, but they weren't that close of friends are my really good friends now because of those moments and that time. I looked forward to those times. I have to say, I feel like I was doing more of talking rather than texting. And I do worry I'm going back to my old ways of texting with people and staying in touch that way. And I just loved I'm going to go for a walk by myself and I'm going to call someone. I feel like some of that was so great that COVID did, and it just allowed us all to get closer.
It was interesting that shift from number of friends, like you said, to quality, and how Whitney talked about smaller circles, but deeper. She had that idea of almost like kind of hiding behind a keyboard, and maybe we kind of got used to that and being willing to set that aside. And especially when she talked about having the friend of things just, the texting was just going clunk and it was like an argument with a dear friend. It's like, just put down the texting and call. And I mean, the courage to do that, to step out from the keyboard and really take it head on like that.
I feel like today I have better friends than I've ever had in my life. And I attribute so much of that to COVID, right? Because I got deeper friendships. I think we all shared a lot more vulnerability. This time it was more about like, how are you doing, right? How are things? How's COVID and quarantine going for you? And it just immediately right out of the gates, you got to start with something quality and real instead of something superficial. This is an area where I definitely could say we can come back better by just really holding on to it. I just hope that I can hold on to it because I just talking about it makes me think about that I might be slipping a little bit back into old ways.
Well, and I think about, there's not just anyone I'll freeze in a backyard with. And Rick was my buddy. I was willing to, put on 20 layers to hang out with him during COVID. And so it was that sense of who's important enough to make that extra effort and continuing that continual pause and reflect. We don't have to stop doing that just because we're post-pandemic, but we can bring intentionality into continued friendships. Like you're saying, I want to continue these habits. Whitney was talking about friendships, and now I know we're going to hear from Kate about romantic relationships. Now, I've been married 28 years, so I can't speak to dating, but really curious to hear what that was like from Kate's experience.
I'm really looking forward to hearing what Kate has to say because this one's very real to me. I broke up also in a relationship about a few months, like right away. It started being on the rocks and having trouble right at the beginning of COVID. It was bad. We were long distance anyways, and then this just made it that much harder.
Oh my goodness.
I'm super curious to hear if her stories were anything like mine. So how about we take a listen?
Hi, my name is Kate, and during the pandemic, I ended an 8-year relationship. We met in our 4th grade classroom and started dating when we were 18. We had an incredible relationship, especially during our most formative years, but I've always wanted to experience being on my own. Never in a million years would I have expected or chose to go through a breakup during a pandemic, but like many people, the pandemic only accentuated the pressure of time passing by, and that it waits for no one. Time doesn't stop just because there's a worldwide crisis. In the months following the breakup, it happened to be the height of the Delta variant, and while normally post-breakup, most people would have gone out drinking and dancing and stalking their ex on social media, I spent most of my time within my bubble and stalking my non-social media present ex through Venmo and Spotify. And I decided to start dating again. It's hard enough to meet anyone in this day and age, but the pandemic really limited the options. But again, the pandemic really made me aware that we're not getting any younger and to push myself out of my comfort zone. The pandemic, along with the political divisiveness, made it easy to swipe left on anyone that didn't have the COVID precautions as you do. It also makes you think, if they're not careful with COVID, what else are they not careful with? Calls and texts from people informing you about their COVID exposure actually started to sound eerily similar to STD contact tracing. At the same time, it made it easier to make sure your values align with the other person earlier on, and not waste your time if that's not the case. Truthfully, dating during the pandemic is overwhelming and underwhelming at the same time. While all breakups are hard, I think going through it during the pandemic was its own special brand of difficult and a blessing in disguise. I think the pandemic really made everyone rethink their priorities in life. I ended an 8-year relationship, quit my job and changed careers, moved across the country, and I don't regret any of it.
I'm hearing a similar theme here. Even though Kate was talking about breaking up with a boyfriend compared to Whitney with friends, there's still this quality of value-based theme as far as what's important to me and basing decisions on that, and how COVID gave her the opportunity to do that. What do you think, Marjorie?
It's so interesting when you are in a relationship and it gets sort of almost like pushed against the wall. I think every single solitary couple had this, right? To some degree or another. It either got you stronger, you fought more. I mean, so many couples would say, oh yeah, we made it work because one travels for work or one leaves for work. And now all of a sudden everyone's home. People can either start to get on each other's nerves or you lean into it. And I do think there's this element that everyone can relate to. I know for me, I was already in a little bit of a rocky relationship. We didn't make it. The distance, the pressure and the stress and all of the things that we both had going on in our own lives, we didn't have a strong enough, I guess, foundation to get through it. And I will say that I felt like going back to the friend thing, I felt like in the very beginning, I was really grieving and I felt like I was grieving alone. One of the things that I did after the initial first few days of really just feeling alone is I started reaching out to friends. And I think that's why I also developed these intimate, deep friendships, is that I forced myself to be vulnerable and say, like, I'm having a really hard time. I'm grateful I was able to do it. It was hard and uncomfortable.
I'm hearing so many similarities to Kate's story, Marjorie, and yours as well, that this willingness to step outside your comfort zone. I got to talk to this amazing expert on relationships and would enjoy bringing in that conversation now to add to what we're talking about here. So Dr. Bita Rivas is a faculty member in the counselor education program at California State University, Sacramento, specializing in marriage, couples, and family counseling, also clinical mental health counseling and addiction counseling. We had a chance to not only talk together, but listen to Paul and Kelsey's story. So a couple who made it through all of this during the pandemic and had some real challenges. I was inspired by listening to them and then hearing Dr. Rivas' take on their experience.
Well, if you were inspired, I know I'm going to be inspired. So let's take a listen.
Hi, I'm Paul.
And I'm Kelsey.
And we're married, and this past year, we were happy to bring twins into the world.
Getting married in the summer of 2019, we went through the pandemic with just a little over 6 months of being husband and wife. We had to do a lot of pivoting and learning throughout that process because that was what the world was doing. The world was pivoting and learning. We both had to help support each other through all of the ups and downs that the pandemic brought. and really make sure that we were helping each other not only in our relationship as husband and wife, but in our professional lives as well.
We were going through something completely unfamiliar, and let's be honest, it was scary for everyone. And to have your partner be there with you and help support you and help each other, and I mean, we really formed a great team. And even being stuck in our apartment, both working together and then being with each other after pretty much 24/7, overall, it was good for both of us. Obviously, we had our moments, like it wasn't perfect. A lot of fights over, cleaning and dishes, but we made it through.
Welcome, Dr. Rivas. Thank you for taking the time today to come together and talk about these amazing experiences we just heard about with Kate, Whitney, and Paul and Kelsey.
Thank you so much for having me, and feel free to call me Bita.
Thanks, Bita. I had a chance to listen to these recordings and you as well. And I'm wondering, what are your first thoughts about hearing these different experiences and how it affected relationships through the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting listening to this theme of challenge, because I feel like we were at this place where we were all kind of in this grind before the pandemic. And as everything halted in the pandemic, right, we were just kind of in the gears.
Good word for it.
We didn't realize how much we were working. And as everything halted, we all kind of paused for a minute. And I think we felt the weight of that collectively. You can hear that theme with the stories of having to kind of pause and really revisit relationships, whether it was what are relationships that are important or how do we come together as a team, were kind of some themes across all of the stories we've heard. And coming out of the pandemic now, it's been different kinds of challenges, because the gears almost are starting to get going again, right? Because we went from a halt, right, to like slowly kind of coming back in a hybridish world and to kind of find a new normal. Yeah. And it's been in that vein, I've been looking at how those stories, how both Kate, Whitney, Paul, and Kelsey were sharing their stories, and it fit that for me.
There was an abruptness to doing the normal. And yet I'm hearing this opportunity for, and this has really been a theme for this entire podcast, maybe we don't want to go back to how we did things before.
Exactly. I don't think we realized it wasn't working, but because we were in it. Once everything paused, we were like, oh man, we had a minute to think before everything went online and got hectic again. And then we started blending it back to seeing people again. But that pause, I think, was key for all of us collectively.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm curious, especially with the two single individuals that we heard from. So there was Kate, who I think ended the 8-year relationship, and then Whitney really took a look at old and new relationships. And I heard technology played a role both in kind of the old way as well as this new hybrid way. I'm curious your thoughts on how technology, we've used it and maybe we can use it better in a way moving forward.
I think that to a degree, some of us got used to just being in this texting world, or we were lacking that one-on-one or using the phone. And I think that's coming back. And you can hear that even in Whitney's story and even with Kate wanting to capitalize on relationships and capitalize on important relationships. And you can't always do that just through texting, for example. And she mentioned that the best. Whitney talked about how sometimes you need to put down the technology and call someone or FaceTime with someone. So I think we're finding this balancing of them to be really important, keeping all of the opportunities we have as a way to stay connected, but then capitalizing on those important relationships through other ways. All of us are kind of catching on to what works for us with technology and what doesn't. What works for us in general? Where do we want to, again, I'm going to go back to where do we want to use our energy? What are the relationships that are important? What amount of time do we want to devote to work? Is work making us feel more connected or more disconnected? And I think Gen Z, having done having been through so many changes at a pivotal time in development, I saw it.
Well, now with relationships, moving from, how many likes or how many friends on Facebook to Whitney talking about deeper, more meaningful relationships, which sometimes does mean put down the keyboard, pick up the phone, and actually have direct contact. Yeah. I'm wondering if we can pivot to talking about this amazing couple and their journey and their willingness to be so open and vulnerable with their journey. What are your first thoughts on hearing marriage and kiddos like right when the pandemic hit?
Well, I guess a challenge and a gift. Because on the one hand, the challenge is the isolation or maybe the lack of access to, depending on where you are, with family and friends. And a thing they talked about happens to a lot of couples when they have their first child, where your friendships change. And I think they spoke to that, where the people that they were friends with, they didn't quite understand what they were going through. So, on the one hand, there's that challenge that we've always had, right? Where when you are the first couple of your friend group to have a kid, your friendships change, right? It's always been there. But then that challenge of in the pandemic and having resources are different. But the opportunity was really to lean on each other. And that's what they really focused on, and that caught my attention too, is that emphasis on being a really strong team, and if they're okay, they can do this together.
So we started our journey of trying to become parents, and in May of 2021, sadly found out we had lost our first pregnancy. That was definitely a large challenge within that time. Not only having to deal with the emotions and thinking that goes with a miscarriage, but doing that while there still was a pandemic going on, and having to really step back and be a team together to get through something super challenging and support each other in that, and really think about when is the next right time to think about starting our family again, and will there ever be the right time to start thinking about starting a family again?
I mean, like we talked about, being isolated together during the pandemic, there was an essence of that after the miscarriage too. I mean, both of us didn't want to see family. We didn't want to see friends. And it was just the two of us having to support each other. And honestly, it was another huge challenge in our relationship that overcoming really just made us stronger. I know that's cliche, but it's true. We just, binged The Office and support each other and wiped each other's eyes quite a bit. And it's something we look back on and really, there's no blessing in getting news like that, but it was something that I think really strengthened our bond and, being there for each other.
So working through that and even continuing to see that the world was starting to become more normal and our worlds were crashing in was super difficult, because the pandemic was really looking like things were going to change and be more positive. And I was in a time, at least, that I was having a challenging time being positive about things because of such a hard thing being dealt to us.
That changes you forever after that.
Their openness in talking about miscarriage. Another thing we're finding right now, mental health was a challenge before. Getting access to mental health and people not having that stigma around talking about challenging events and talking about where our mental health was a challenge. And after the pandemic, I think it was just in our face. So we started talking about what we're going through. And you see that with a lot of people sharing their stories on Instagram or sharing their loss story. And I think that was a piece that they shared that is unique to right now, where we're not just sharing the happy things only. We're sharing the challenging, we're sharing how we came through it. And they really did come together stronger as a result of talking about it and working through it together.
You work with couples, and if you had a couple before you and you wanted to use Paul and Kelsey as an example, what would be the highlights you'd say of, here's a couple who struggled and made it through?
I would talk about, and they said this specifically, conflict is okay. Because they elected to talk about what was uncomfortable. and they were comfortable being uncomfortable. They worked through it together, where if you don't talk about it or you hide it or you stuff it away, your partner is left guessing. And in this case, they didn't leave each other guessing.
So after that whole summer, we talked about it, and Kelsey and I felt, comfortable and in the right place to start trying again and do that journey all over again. And then we found out, very quickly that Kelsey was pregnant again. It was funny. The vibe of finding out Kelsey was pregnant at that time was completely different than the first time. It wasn't just pure excitement. It was cautious optimism, definitely. And because of her miscarriage, we were able to get an ultrasound very early on.
When we got our early ultrasound, we found out right away that instead of us having one, we were having two. So we found out we were having twins. So I was in complete shock. And I know Paul was too, because I could just see it on his face when we were in the ultrasound. And it was a lot of mixed emotions when we found out. There was definitely excitement that there were 2 heartbeats and 2 babies, but knowing also that is yet another huge risk when you hear about pregnancy is when there's multiples. Dealing with having to start our family then, after what we had just gone through with the miscarriage, was very anxiety-ridden and worrisome.
I mean, it was a test on our relationship once again of resiliency, and we're getting what we want, but it's also extremely high anxiety.
The boys came into the world in April of 2022. And
2 healthy boys.
Yes, 2 healthy boys.
Healthy mom.
It was an experience in the hospital because, again, the pandemic's not done. So we had different visitor policies. We had different things that had to be discussion points for Paul and I as we thought about what is this going to mean as the boys come home? Who are we going to allow to be around them? What are our precautions that we're going to take to make sure that these infants are staying healthy and safe too? We started the next challenge of then being parents and understanding and thinking about, okay, now what? These babies are home. What are we going to do?
And not just parents, but becoming overnight parents of 2. Something that friends and family who had kids, that they couldn't relate to that. And being new parents, really navigating having a blank slate of parenting knowledge, and really, I hate to say it, but it's a lot of surviving. And we kind of learned too early on that if we're not doing well together, then our kids are off worse too. And we can't be good parents if our marriage isn't good. And so, like Kelsey mentioned, not just like communicating a lot, but just being really open and honest. If something's bothering you about your partner, just bring it to the limelight in, appropriate, sensitive way. A lot of couples, and we had these issues too of like the passive aggressiveness. If something's bothering you and just kind of trying to hide it, we don't have time for that.
Well, I don't think it's that not even just the time piece. I mean, time is a factor when you have 2 babies. But I think it was also the foundation of what are we modeling for our boys now?
Yeah,
we
for
could
sure.
have these communication errors and problems when we weren't parents, and they wouldn't affect anybody but us. But I think we also have an understanding that everything we do and say now is the foundation to what our boys are going to see. And thinking of them, what do we want them to see and hear from mom and dad? And I think open communication is something we wanted to model for them and do want to model for them. So working on it now so that as they grow older, they see it just as a normal part of their life and upbringing and a normal part of being an adult. Mm-hmm. Adults have conflict, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I'd say having 2 kids has been the ultimate test of teamwork. Neither of us can do it alone, and we know that. And so I think that makes our relationship so much more important to us because of that. We need each other to be there for our kids. And so when one of us is really struggling, the other one knows when to tap in and, kind of take over the situation. We're really good at reading that on each other. And one of us is having a hard time. It's like we always know when to like step in.
Yeah. And I think it's a good example of, I know the saying always goes, everybody gives 50-50, but I don't think always that is the way of relationships. I think sometimes your best might not be that 50% that's there. And I think we've gotten really good at reading when maybe I can only give 20%, so Paul has to give the 80%. And that's okay, because it's not a battle of who's doing it more often or who's doing this. We've gotten really good at, you know what, there's a need and we're just going to step up and do it.
For sure. And there's just some things in parenting, like certain skills that Kelsey's better at than I am, and there's maybe one thing I'm better at than her.
That's not true.
Washing bottles.
No. But yeah, I think that playing off strengths has been something. But I think also in that it's being a team and knowing like, oh, I might have a strength of something and helping you learn and strengthen that in yourself. Having kids has made our relationship the strongest it's ever been. We make sure to be intentional about spending time together, just the two of us. We make sure that monthly we have something that we can do together. Try to get out of the house so that it's really just us two being present with one another and continuing our husband-wife relationship, because if we don't have anything else to give, if our cups are empty, we can't give to our kids the way we want to.
And we both learned that being a mom, being a dad, they're cornerstones of who we are now. I've learned that, and which I didn't realize before having kids, but like, you can be a dad, but you're also your own person. And it's good not to ignore that. And not just dad, but like, I'm also a husband, and not to just put that aside to be a dad. It has to be a balancing act. Obviously now with them being young, we're definitely more mom and dad than any other identity trait. But we, like Kelsey said, we do find the time to be husband and wife. We find the time to see friends, not as much as we used to, but like we knew that going into this and what we signed up for.
I loved how Paul first attributed to time, with parenting twins. Like, there's not time to be passive aggressive. We got to get right to it. And then Kelsey kind of further expanded that it's even more than just time.
Part of it is, you just really don't have the time. But the other part of it that she was saying is it was important to them. It was important enough to make the time for that. There's a lot of stuff you don't have time for with kids, right?
Right, especially twins.
It's kind of like, right, especially with twins. It's kind of like when you're waiting tables. There was this saying, I used to wait tables once upon a time, a long time ago. And if all of your tables got seated at once, they said you're in the weeds. And that's what parenting and that's what twins feels like. You're in the weeds. All the needs are there. You're just trying to keep up. And in that, they've done this unique thing of making sure they prioritize their relationship. And they said it, this is really important. If they are a strong, cohesive team, if they enjoy each other's company and have time for each other's company, they enjoy their kids better, and their kids it just makes parenting a little bit doable and growing together. I mean, in that, you can hear the story of they were kind of growing together in this journey. I mean, they had no friends that were going through it, right? They were the first of their friend group, is what I'm assuming.
What would be your recommendations to bring that intentionality into life post-pandemic?
I think one of the challenges we're having is this idea of normal and going back to normal. I think we may need to find a new normal. And I think that should be our key, is we need a new normal. And in this new normal, I think we all collectively and as a society have to think through, where should our time be spent? What are our priorities? It feels like we're a work-heavy culture. And in the pandemic, I mean, that didn't stop. Either people lost their jobs or they went online, right? And so work didn't slow down. So I think we've got to really revisit our relationship with work to balance the other things and have an expectation that it is equally, if not more important, for my family to be healthy, for my relationships to be healthy, for me to be in a healthy communion with others, if that makes sense, rather than collectively having a lot of people we're quote friends with or a lot of likes like we used to have. We're kind of at this place of quality now versus quantity. And I think that balance is going to have to come with really prioritizing our values.
That's the word that was ringing in my head. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, I think collectively in hearing these stories, there's this theme of what's important. Whether it was Kate saying, I'm really revisiting this relationship that I'm in, to Whitney saying, I found my real friends, to Paul and Kelsey saying, I'm coming together. Those are the important pieces, right? I think we have to really revisit what is quality, what are my values, and who is important to me.
Paul, you know what I just loved about that story was just how great Paul, not you, Paul, the other Paul, that Paul and Kelsey, like their communication skills. It was so inspiring just to hear how strong their communication was with each other. And just a miscarriage is such a hard thing to go through. And it did just really feel like they worked as a team to overcome the challenges. And that was kind of like what I was saying earlier. I think couples got stronger. They really worked as a team and they overcame their challenges. And it sounds like they were able to kind of reevaluate their relationship to really make it work. And it's a good lesson for all of us. So many things can get in the way, and yet they did a really good job at that. We all just kind of need to think about, where do we want to spend our time, right? Where do we want to put our effort? There was a lot of good themes with all three of these conversations around quality and quality over quantity, which I will say, Paul, is a little bit different than what social media tells us, right? On social media, it's
Good
like,
point.
how
Yeah.
many friends do you have and how many likes did you get on your Instagram posts and all those things? And yet, I
Right.
think what we're learning is that really it is about quality, because a handful of really good friends in so many ways is all you need, or a partner, yet, and a relationship where you can be vulnerable and say, I'm having a hard time, and
Goes
just
so
like
much
they did,
further. Yeah.
let's talk through ways that we could work better together. That's so much better than a whole bunch of superficial friends and then a relationship where you can't be vulnerable, you can't grow.
Yeah, the theme of quality and what do I value. Yeah, and as I listened to Paul and Kelsey, I started thinking we should sign them up for a course on healthy marriages. As Dr. Rivas saw how they just really kept coming back to, here's the challenge. What do we need to do to get through this? But I heard more than surviving. There was this sense of, no, really, to be good parents, we need to take care of ourselves as individuals and as a couple. And so what do we need to do that? And I love that at first, Paul talking about, we didn't have time to be passive aggressive. We had to be open and honest, but there was more to it than that. Yeah. And this idea of it's okay to not be okay, which, I mean, we've heard that time and time again, but they took it one step further. It's okay to have conflict as long as there's a commitment to get through it. My goodness, this couple, what they had been through, first the marriage, then the miscarriage, and then twins. Oh my goodness. They rose to the challenge every time.
I feel like they mastered, or they're working on it and continue to work on it, that balance of giving and receiving, right? That's like that's so important. For some people, they're good at giving, but not good at receiving. And other people are really good at receiving and not good at giving. And I think back to my relationship that I was mentioning that ended in COVID. I walked away from that thinking, I don't want to do that anymore. I want a balance going forward. So grateful to learn from those experiences. But I hope that we can all hold on to those lessons learned. It's so critical, right? Because otherwise it's just a big waste if we just go back to our old ways. I appreciate you sharing that last story last, because I felt like it was just so inspirational.
Yeah, and I so related to that comment about, a good relationship is not 50-50, and how Kelsey talked about, if I'm down, hopefully the other person is up. And I've always shared about parenting a special needs kiddo before. And really that's how Cindy and I have made it, that this time of look across the room, and when Cindy has that look, it's like, okay, I got to rally now because she needs this. And she responds with that as well. And, the days we both have the look, oh my goodness, then we just hold on for dear life. But luckily those days have been few and far between.
Oh, well, it also sounds like you know how to read each other, which is also really critical.
Yeah. Oh, I know the look. I know how to read the look.
Well, it was another great episode. Thank you for sharing some time with me here today. I really enjoyed being with you. I have to say I'm equally excited and interested about next week's topic around loneliness. I think it's another topic we can all relate to.
Yeah, I think that's a variation on a theme from today. So I look forward to picking that up next week. Thanks, Marjorie.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
If you'd like to reach us, you can do so at podcast@psychhub.com. To be notified of new episodes, don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow wherever you're listening. And reviews are so helpful, so please do leave one if you can. It will allow others to find us and join along. Coming Back Better is executive produced by Jacob Morrison. It is produced and edited by Juliana Castro. The series was developed in collaboration with Linda Rosenberg, Carla Cantor, and Kristen Watson from Columbia University Department of Psychiatry, and Manisha Shah, Dr. Frank Drummond, and Amy Rushton from HCA Healthcare. Research is assisted by Melissa Leaf. Show artwork was created by Arnella Jangoli and Ashton Smith. Audience strategy is by Alyssa Fackler, Sarah Hale, and Alyssa Yarama. A very special thanks to Andrea Rollback, Trevin Stegall, Evelyn Valentine, Kaylee Sneed, Julie Plummer, Thad Thomas, Paul Kay, and Elizabeth Roosevelt. Coming Back Better is a co-production from Psych Hub and Columbia University Department of Psychiatry and is brought to you by HCA Healthcare. I'm Paul Deger, and my co-host Marjorie Morrison and I thank you for joining us. See you next week.